Good morning on this fantastic Sunday morning. Looking forward to sharing with you this morning. Today, we're going to start a new sermon series. I've mentioned it before, and some people, maybe some people, many years ago, have heard part of this series. The sermon series title is the same as then, but the inside stuff is similar but totally different and more modern and more research that's gone into it. And I've learned a lot, and so I'm looking forward to sharing with you in this journey that we're going to be walking. The title of the sermon series is The Similarities Between Jesus and Old Testament Joseph. The similarities between Jesus and Old Testament Joseph. It's going to be lots of history from the Old Testament, popping into the Old Testament, but then lots of confirmation in the Bible, the truth of the Bible, in the similarities that we pick up in Jesus' life, because that isn't a coincidence. This is a God incidence. This is a planned thing between, the triune God and us to come and show us that the Bible is indeed truth. Nobody in those years could orchestrate what we are going to reveal to you. But if I ask you the question, who are you? Who are you? I wonder how many of us would answer. I wonder, some of us would be stumped completely when we say, who are we? Some, would maybe be a bit shy to answer because it's a very difficult question. But then if I twisted that around and I asked you, so what do others think about you? Who do others think you are like? I think that many of us would shy back from that and say, I'm not sure, I don't know. Why should it, why should that matter? And the reason it matters, let's just take an example. If you decide to follow in the career of a cricketer, you would pick out the cricketer that you admire, and you are going to try and copy that cricketer. If you look at a bowler, you will see certain bowlers have certain characteristics of somebody that they admire, the same as a batter. And so this is what this is all about, where we see somebody and those characters are carried across. And so this is what we're going to be looking at today. So, who do you say you are? It reminds me, in actual fact, of many years ago when I worked for a company called SMM Instruments. And we specialized in medical and scientific instrumentation. And I was stationed in Cape Town. It was 1,300 kilometers away from Johannesburg, an hour and about an hour and a quarter, hour and a half's flight from Johannesburg. And one day I received a phone call from Zimbabwe, from Dr. Paul Wainbrin. He owned one of the best equipped laboratories in Zimbabwe. In fact, I'd even go as far as saying South Africa as well. It was tremendously well equipped. And he phoned me and he said to me, he said, Ray, when I ask for a service on any of my instruments or all of my instruments, what we used to do is group them together so that we didn't have to fly up and down too often, even from Johannesburg. He said, whenever I ask for service, I want you to come up. I said to him, Dr. Wainbrin, that's fine. I understand what you're saying, but do you realize that this is going to cost you a whole lot of money, because the company charges you for traveling time. So in other words, you would be charged from when I left Cape Town and not from Johannesburg. I can't cut that out because the company won't allow it. He says, Ray, that's fine. He says, it's not about the money. I want you to come and look after the instruments. So I said to him, that's fine. And the first time he phoned and set up a time for me to go to Harare, off I went to Harare. He surprised me by putting me up in the Monopatapa Hotel, which was the best hotel in Zimbabwe. We started working on his instruments, and this carried on for a while. And then I think it was about the third time that I went up. I was working, and I ended up finishing off a little bit earlier than normal. And what happened is that he said to me, are you okay to come to our house for a meal? So I said, yeah, that's fine. That'll be great. It'll be good. Thank you very much. And so that evening, the way that Paul Wainbrin worked, a taxi came and picked me up. He had arranged that, not common in Zimbabwe. I know it's common in many other places, but this taxi came and picked me up and took me off to his house. And obviously the taxi driver didn't have sat nav to take me there. He knew exactly where the house was, and so obviously had done this before. So, we went and we drove in. The house was massive. The area it was on was massive, and all the lawn was immaculately cut, everything in place. And as I walked in, I was greeted by 5 rather large dogs. And that was all fine and everything. And then he took me and showed me around a couple of places, and I realized that he had 5 servants. 5 servants. We had a meal. It was fantastic, really fantastic. It was really fine dining experience at his house. And I mentioned it to him, and he said, "Oh no, that's how we eat every night." I said, who prepares this food? Because I know that his wife is also a doctor in the laboratory, and so she's not there to prepare that food. He says, no. He says, one of my servants is a trained chef, and he prepares the menu for the week, and he prepares the meal. Just to say, I was there during the time when in Zimbabwe there were no supplies. There was no chocolate, there was no meat, there was none of. And yeah, we were having these massive steaks. There was chocolate. There was, so yeah, let's say no more. And so after the meal, we sat down and we started to chat a little bit. And, I said to him, I said, Paul, just excuse me. I said, it's one thing I don't understand. Why is it that you don't want me to arrange for one of the engineers from Johannesburg to come up and service your instruments, because they're just as good as I am, if not better. And, they can do the work. And he looked straight at me and he thought for a while. And he said, Ray, I asked you to always come and work on my instruments because I know that your father is Percy and I trusted him with my life. I was shocked. I didn't know what to say. It caught me totally off guard. So the only thing I could say was, please, Paul, just explain. And he just smiled. He said, and to cut a long story short, what he actually came back, he says that my father was his sergeant major in the war, and Paul was my dad's sergeant. This was a big surprise. And as he went on, he said, your surname was obviously a giveaway because it's not a common surname. He says, however, I saw your character coming out, showing, displaying your father's character. You were just so similar. The way you worked, the way you were confident in what you were doing, the way that you went about your work. It was just like your father would have been doing. And that struck him. And he said, because of that, he said, I had no option. I had to ask the son of the man who I trusted my life to come and look after my instruments. Needless to say, at the end of this story, what happened that evening, my eyes were definitely not dry. And so character in a person often gets carried across families, but character also gets carried across to different people because of a chosen lifestyle fixed to that character, fixed to that truth. And the example that I mentioned earlier on about the cricket player, that's what I'm talking about, where you admire the cricket player and you become like that cricket player, and the character of that cricket player, comes into your lifestyle. And quite often you see people even trying to walk and copy that other person without even realizing it. And that character just rubs off. this series that we're going to be looking at is proof of that theory, and we're going to, be reminded of that theory all along. Because if you look at Joseph in the Old Testament, look at Jesus in the New Testament, there was, so many years had gone past between the two that, number one, there's a character rub off, but the question that we have is, how did that character rub off? How did that work? Two people in the Bible that were never ever, nothing was ever stated bad about them, and that's Jesus and Joseph. And so, how did that work? Well, it's only one way that it worked. It worked because it was a God plan. This was a God incident, not a coincidence, and that's why it worked. And so let us start by looking at the characters, Joseph and Jesus, and try and see who they are. So we start with Genesis chapter 37, verses 1 and 2. Jacob lived in the land where his father had stayed, the land of Canaan. This is the account of Jacob's family line. Joseph, a young man of 17, was tending the flocks with his brothers, the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives, and he brought their father a bad report about them. And so Joseph was looking after the sheep with his brothers, his brothers were the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, and those were his father's wives. And then Joseph brought a bad report to his father about them. What does it say? It doesn't say that Joseph is a tattletale. It says that Joseph was very dedicated and he was concerned. And so we need to have a look at a couple of points as far as this is concerned. Joseph was tending flock. He was a shepherd. He was a good shepherd because he did it right according to his father's plan, while his brothers obviously were messing around, not doing it according to time, not doing their job properly, and they were actually wasting money, their father's money, and that's the problem that he had with them. Joseph wasn't only tending the flock, so he was concerned about the flock. And because he was concerned about the flock, he reported this bad behavior to his father. And so there was a relationship there. Now we need to remember all that. And then let's turn to the New Testament. John chapter 10, verse 7 to 13. Therefore, Jesus said again, very truly, I tell you, I am the gate for the sheep. All who have come before me, thieves and robbers, are thieves and robbers, but the sheep have not listened to them. I am the gate. Whoever enters through me will be saved. They will come in and go out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and to kill and to destroy. I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. The hired hand is not the shepherd and does not own the sheep. So when he sees a wolf coming, he abandons the sheep and runs away. Then the wolf attacks the flock and scatters it. The man runs away because he is a hired hand and cares nothing for the sheep. We read thus far. We obviously now turn to the life of Jesus and look at Jesus. And we need to start by looking at how this reading started. It says, therefore Jesus said again. Now, that means that all the words that follow were in actual fact Jesus speaking. So this is Jesus speaking. So you can't say that this is not true or anything like that, or somebody did something. This is Jesus speaking. And, in my Bible, it's printed in red. It's called a red letter Bible. And so all these words are red. And so you cannot have a truer voice, a truer point than what Jesus himself says. So Jesus continues to say that he is the gate. And all who came before him, all those people that came, were liars, where they made promises. They made promises to people for whatever, for eternal life, for looking after life, looking after whatever that was. He said they were liars. And when we study the records, when we have a look at the people between Jesus, people between the time of Jesus and Joseph, we see that the statement is correct. There were so many people, so many magicians who claimed to be able to do things, trying to copy and mimic Jesus, but they were lies. They were not the true thing. They were not Jesus. And so, Jesus says that nobody else can take his place, which is so true. And so this is good news for us as Christians. We know that because of our dedication and our commitment to Jesus as Savior, we are going to heaven. And that is the only way to heaven. Jesus tells it. He continues to warn us and to say that there are many people in various forms, and they come only to try and steal and to kill and to destroy. I wonder, if you think about the world around us, isn't that where we live at the moment? Aren't there so many people being tempted by the world and trying to gain more power, gain more wealth, gain this and gain that and gain that for their own consumption, their own use? And you just wonder when, where is that all going to stop? Because at the end of the day, it's not that they are just doing it for themselves. What's happening is that those temptations are drawing people away from Jesus towards the world. Jesus has warned us about this, and we need to be careful. Maybe you're thinking, Ray, how can you do this? How can you say, don't beat me up. I'm sharing with you and helping you to understand what Jesus himself has told us. So Jesus comes to tell us that he has come to bring us life, and life to the fullest. And the only way that we can do that is by listening to the next verse. He says, that is Jesus, I am the good shepherd, and the good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. The hired hand is not the shepherd and does not own the sheep. So when he sees the wolf coming, he abandons the sheep and runs away. My friends, this is a direct arrow pointing to the crucifixion, where Jesus was hanging on the cross, and the people that were supposed to have been there, the disciples, had all run away except John. At least his mother was there, but the other people had run away because they were scared, because the thief was coming, and they were scared because the wolf was coming, and they ran away. But Jesus comes and says he is the good shepherd, and he lays his life down for his sheep. Jesus did exactly that. He was crucified on the cross. He was the best shepherd that we could ever have. Wow, what a comparison. What a comparison. Joseph was this good shepherd in the Old Testament, and Jesus is this good shepherd in the New Testament, leading to different things, but so similar. And, you cannot expect the scripts that we have got, the original scripts, the way that they point to these two to each other, the way that you can see that the character carries across so many years. This can't be by coincidence, friends. This is God's work. The next point is that Genesis 37:3, now Israel, that's Jacob. Now Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other sons, because he had been born to him in his old age, and he made an ornate robe for him. So Joseph was loved by his father. He was his favorite. And because he was a favorite, what he did, what Jacob did, was that he made an ornate robe for him. We call that ornate robe the multicolored coat. And, that has become, something that falls easily off of the tip of our tongues. And we say thank you to Andrew Lloyd Webber and Tim Rice for that, for the multi-colored, amazing dream coat. And so, that's where that comes from. And so from this, we can conclude that Joseph was the beloved, the favorite of his father. And we need to hold on to that. He was a favorite, and he gave that coat to his son because he was the favorite. So let's go to the New Testament. And when we go to the New Testament, we read from Matthew this time. Matthew 3, verse 13 to 17. Then Jesus came from Galilee to the Jordan to be baptized by John. But John tried to deter him, saying, I need to be baptized by you, and do you come to me? Jesus replied, let it be so now. It is proper for us to do this, to fulfill all righteousness. And then John consented. As soon as Jesus was baptized, he went up out of the water, and at that moment the heavens opened, and he saw the Spirit of God descending like a dove, alighting on him. And a voice from heaven said, this is my Son whom I love. With him I am well pleased. We know the story very well, but I hope that you picked up and focused on verse 17. And a voice came from heaven and said, this is my Son whom I love. With him I am well pleased. Whoa, whoa. This is God speaking about his son, his favorite son. He was his favorite son. A voice came from heaven that is much bigger than any miracle that could ever happen in the Old Testament. And, God comes and says, this is my son. I know Jacob was very old when he had his son, which is a miracle alone, but this is massive, and nothing could be better than that. Joseph's father showed that he loved his son by making a coat. God, Jesus' father, showed that he loved his son by speaking from heaven. But at the end of the day, Joseph was his father's favorite, and Jesus, as we heard, was God's favorite. And so both of them were loved by their father in similar ways. And so we're already starting to see the similarity between Joseph and Jesus. And it illustrates, as I said earlier on, it illustrates the truth of the Bible. And, we can't plan this. Nobody humanly can plan this. This is God planning this. And because of that, we can see that Jesus foretold the life, can see Jesus' life in the life of Joseph. And Joseph's life actually pointed towards Jesus, the Savior to come. And so we started by asking the question, who are we? We see who Joseph is. We see who Jesus is. We've been introduced to the sermon series, and I guess we need to ponder on this question. Are the people seeing Jesus through us? Can the people say that when they look at us, when they walk with us, when they talk with us, can they see the character of Jesus shining through? It's an ongoing struggle to try and get there. I try, I fail. I failed horribly, but I try, and I will keep on trying. My challenge to you is that maybe you can also try, because when we start getting this right, we start living like Jesus, and that is the kingdom life that we've been learning about before.